Welcome to the Designing Music Now podcast, a podcast dedicated to the craft of creating music for video games and interactive media. I'm your host, Dale Crowley. Today, I will be talking with Adam Levenson and Ollie Glatzer of Somatone Interactive, a global provider of audio solutions for video games and interactive media.
Enemy hero killed. Allies kind of a big deal. You have killed an enemy.
Draven does it all, with style.
They will regret opposing me. When going gets tough, you call bro.
There is much to learn about this world.
I am testament to the glory of Shurima.
Never underestimate the power of the Scout's Code.
Venga! Wow! Santa Gordita! Sugar Smash!
Hey guys, it's Demi Lovato. I wanted to invite you to join me on my world tour. I'll be here with you. See you guys on tour.
Okay, well, welcome to the Designing Music Now podcast. Today, my guests are Adam Levenson and Ollie Glatzer of Somatone Interactive. We are really thrilled to have both of them. A little bit of background about Adam. He has nearly 25 years of broad-based experience in various hands-on creative, managerial, and executive roles in virtually every aspect of interactive sound and music production, encompassing the creative, technical, legal, and business aspects of the industry. Adam's career has evolved from being a classically trained musician, playing sessions and live performances, to working as a composer and a sound designer in the burgeoning multimedia industry in the early 90s. We actually go back together to that time where I was working at a company that Adam provided the sound for. And beside that, and after that, Adam was moved on to become a music director and audio director at companies like Interplay, Electronic Arts, and Shiny. And during his tenure as senior director at Activision from 2006 to 2011, Adam established and managed both the Central Audio and Central Talent teams supporting work on major franchises such as Call of Duty, Skylanders, James Bond, Spider-Man, and Transformers. In 2011, Adam launched Levenson Artist Agency, providing representation to clients and celebrity composers such as Hans Zimmer, and also Cirque du Soleil soloist and cellist and brilliant performer Tina Guo, and many others. Adam is currently serving as the Chief Operating Officer at Somatone Interactive, a global industry leader in creative content production and specializing in sound and music for interactive and online entertainment. And Ollie, just introduce yourself briefly as well.
Sure. I'm Ollie Glatzer. I am senior producer at Somatone, work directly with Adam and our content production team on a multitude of projects. Been with these guys for a little under 2 years, and my total, I've been in the industry for about 10 years total prior to Somatone.
And you're a violist.
That's correct. That's my background. Viola performance degree. Studied classical music for 25 years, in addition to studying technology and music. Also moving into the composition and experimental realms as well.
Fantastic. And what is your instrument, Adam?
So I was a percussionist. I started playing drums when I was 7 years old, and eventually ended up going to Boston University for classical music training, and I became a orchestral percussionist at that point.
Wow.
And then I decided that I was kind of bored with orchestral music, and I went to go play rock and roll. Um, I played in a rock band for a year, and sort of in the pursuit of learning more about my creative potential and also about music from different places and different cultures, I decided to get my master's degree at California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles, and was exposed to just an incredible variety of music, including from Africa, Indonesia, India, the Middle East. It was just an amazing opportunity to get a direct experience with master musicians from those countries. And so that's my career kind of went in what we would now call like the world music direction. And in a very strange turn of events, that's how I got into video games.
And how did that happen?
Working for the same company.
Yeah, was that one of your first gigs? It was my first gig in the video game industry at Mind Control Software. Was that one of your first?
It was one of my first gigs. My very first gig was on a title called "How Do You Spell Adventure?" And it was a CD-ROM game, of course, because that's what was hot back then. And it was, probably a few hundred dialogue lines, because it was a spelling game. And at the time, a few hundred dialogue lines was like inconceivable. Like, how do we do this? How do we process all of this stuff? And Pro Tools, I think you and I talked about this previously. Pro Tools was so unstable back then.
Oh, yeah, well, it still is. It's gotten better in 12.
Yeah. I mean, it would crash and you'd like lose everything. And that just kept happening. But I remember L1 had just come out. And so, one of the things I had to do, because these dialogue files were supposed to play back at 8-bit 11K.
Oh, awesome.
Really awesome quality. Yeah. That's all they could do is 11K. So we had to crunch the hell out of them using L1 to try to get the most out of that low bit rate. And so I told the producer on that project that doing this L1 process was going to make the file size bigger. And he was like, well, no, it doesn't. And I was like, well, yes, it does. And then like a year later, I realized that my statement was totally wrong. And of course, L1 does not do anything to file size, but that just shows how young and innocent I was back in 1991 or whatever that was.
Well, and there were no courses really in audio production, right? I mean, you couldn't go to Berkeley College online or anything else.
There were no schools. There were no schools until many years later. And I think you and I might have talked about this before, like terminology, like audio director, sound designer. Oh, yeah. Like these things were sort of alien. I remember telling people I'm a sound designer. I work in video games, and they would just stare at me like I had said something in Mandarin. Good thing Dale is actually fluent in Mandarin, but most people are not. So I would say sound designer, and they would just give me this blank stare. So it's amazing to see what has happened, in the past more than 2 decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Ollie, how did you get your start in video game music?
Well, it's funny you mentioned 91 because that was the year I took my first computer music course, and that was SY 99 Yamaha, and that was my introduction to at least the process. But being an avid gamer, I mean, I just got entranced by the music and sound, even in those kind of cruder days, the 80s and the 90s, early 90s. So really just, music, playing a lot of games, and then getting under the hood eventually led me to the game industry. As a sound designer and composer, I mean, I've always been intrigued by the use of sound through games and through film, basically.
Very cool. So in terms of background, let me just ask one other question that I like to ask people. First, you, Adam, how did you get started in music, and what are your earliest memories?
So I love that question because, when you're, I guess, well, some people have vivid memories of when they were really little, like 3 or 2 years old. I don't have that. So that's all gone. But when I was, I think 6 or 7 years old, I have this vivid memory of like somehow ending up holding 2 pencils. And all of a sudden I was like tapping these pencils on the carpet. This was in 19 God knows when, and I had this total epiphany. A 7-year-old had this total epiphany. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be. I'm not kidding. I want to be a drummer. And it was I'll never forget that moment. And thanks to my parents being supportive at the time, of course that evaporated later, but at the time they were supportive, and they were like, we're going to send you, for drum lessons.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was one of the youngest kids in my elementary school to, get private music lessons.
Yep.
And it felt very special, and I loved it. So I became a drummer, and I really think it was, one of the first sort of like creative motivations I had in my life was to go in that direction.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up on the North Shore of the Boston area in a town called Marblehead. A very quaint little town, very old. One of the first American towns. So there's like houses from like the 1600s. But of course, we had to travel. My mom had to drive me to drum lessons, which was actually quite far away. So God bless her, she used to do that every week, and eventually I guess I became pretty good, and it became like the main thing in my life. Music was absolutely the main thing in my life.
Yeah.
And you had the drum set in the house, and how did the family take to that?
I love these questions.
Yeah, it's good.
So so it was suburbia, of course. And it wasn't until later that I realized that not everybody was Jewish, because it was an all Jewish neighborhood basically. I'm not sure how that's germane, but I figured I'd add that. But in any case, we had a neighbor at the time who was like, "Oh, your son," she told my mother, "your son sounds really great. He sounds like a professional drummer." And I remember my mother coming to tell me that. However, soon after that, another neighbor did not appreciate the drumming to that level. And in fact, he got quite aggressive about not appreciating it. And eventually he ended up at my bedroom window, completely losing his mind, because he, probably wanted to have some quiet time, and I was not making that possible. So this is, I think all drummers in the world can relate to angry neighbors. And
musicians for that matter.
Yes.
Yeah, my brother was a drummer. I was a pianist, but my brother was a drummer. And when I would practice for 6-8 hours a day, he would sometimes get so tired of it, he would bring his snare drum and set it right down next to me and just do it, stuff. And I got the message, So Ollie, what was your earliest memory in music, and how did you get started?
I mean, officially at the age of 7 as well, actually. So we have that in common. I took piano lessons very briefly, and it just didn't stick with me. And I think it was seeing a video of Itzhak Perlman playing violin, to be honest with you. And I just saw that, and I saw the violin, and I heard what he was doing with it. And I said to my parents, I said, that thing is really cool. I want to do that. So, pretty soon after that, I started taking Suzuki lessons, and then from there just really blossomed. It was incredible. Yeah.
And viola was far more gentle on the ears than a drum set, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good choice, actually. You know what is interesting, though, is how many drummers there are in the video game world. There are so
it's true. Jason Graves, for example.
There are a ton of percussionists or drummers who end up as sound designers, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But it is kind of remarkable just how many there are.
Okay, guys, thanks for your background information. That was really interesting. Now I'm interested in the history of your company, Somatone Interactive. Can you tell me a little bit about its history and formation?
Absolutely, Dale. Thanks. I was just about to say that I was talking to Dun and Bradstreet yesterday. You might be familiar with them. They're a business credit reporting agency. And I was telling them about Somatone's long history, and they were kind of surprised because, normally, companies that might look like a startup, they just expect, those kind of companies to disappear within a couple of years.
Mhm.
And most companies like Somatone have a tendency not to stay around very long, because it is very challenging to run any small business, whether it's a convenience store or a game, music, and sound production company. So Somatone started in 2003. And it was started by Nick Thomas and Kane Minkus, who were both Berkeley college graduates. And these two very ambitious young guys started a studio in South of Market, in the South of Market district in San Francisco, thus Somatone. And a great name. So very auspicious beginnings, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Interestingly, they started the company kind of with the ambition of doing website sounds. And I don't know if you've ever used archive.org, but you can actually go look at the original, one of the original Somatone websites,
Yeah.
And see what they were doing. And as soon as you see it, you're like, wow, these guys were doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it turned out that no one actually wanted sound on website animations, but the way they were presenting themselves and the whole vibe was cool. And they had some early success, and that evolved into doing sound and music for casual games, social network games like Facebook games, and they became kind of a brand name in that space.
Yeah.
So when the mobile industry cropped up, and the iPhone eventually came out in, I think, 2006, Somatone was like perfectly positioned in that community to become the go-to for those kind of games. And they became known for hidden object games and what else we were talking about earlier. Oh, early CD-ROM, of course.
A lot of CD-ROM.
And since those times, Somatone has grown into becoming a global leader. And I know that might sound like hyperbole, but it actually is just the truth. We have clients all over the world, across basically every genre and platform of video game. Yeah. We like to think of ourselves as being the biggest and the best. But I think one thing we can definitely say is that the company has gone from, what is truly a startup in 2003 to now really being an established force in the music and sound production industry in video games. So I'm often really kind of amazed and have a lot of pride in what I would call the brand equity of the company.
Right, and you've been there for about a year and a half. How did you find them, and how did they find you?
Great question. So, you mentioned that during your introduction, which I appreciate. Thank you for that excellent introduction. That I was running a talent agency for composers and sound designers in the video game industry, and Somatone became one of my clients. And I was immediately fascinated by the company. I had heard of Somatone, as many people have, but I had never, worked with Somatone. I didn't know Nick or Kane, and so as soon as I started getting a glimpse into what Somatone was doing, I was just fascinated. I just thought it was amazing to see how many projects, how many clients the company was working with, and how, frankly, ambitious Nick Thomas was in his approach to growing the company and finding new ways to tap into different genres and different platforms. And a few months after working with the company, Nick came to me and said, would you like to basically take over management?
Here are the keys to the castle. Would you care for that?
I consider myself to be a fairly experienced negotiator. And in fact, I'm just finishing up law school now. So you would think that, I would be a very considered negotiator. But when Nick said that to me, I just said, yes, I'll do it. And, which completely undermined my whole negotiation position. No, seriously, I saw the potential, and the way I feel sitting in this chair is everything I know is kind of brought to bear, and so I think it's a good match.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that's the way it all started.
Fantastic. And Ollie, how did you get started in the company? And what is your role there on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so my role, I'm here as a senior producer, project management for most of our projects, and I work directly with the music team, sound design team, coordinating client communications, and so forth. I was initially contacted for the producer role by Michael Bross, who is formerly kind of creative audio director here. So he reached out to me. I'd met him in the early stage of moving back down to the Bay Area, which was about 3 years ago, and had a good rapport with him and met Nick, and that's kind of where that started, basically.
Cool. And where were you before? Which city and what company?
I was in Seattle, and I was in Seattle for about 10 years prior to moving back down here. I actually grew up in Oakland, so this is
Okay.
yeah.
Very cool. Well, it is going to be cultivating a career month at Designing Music Now, and we're going to get a lot of opinions and questions out to the people who are involved with the site. And I would also like to ask you guys some advice that you would have for talented composers who are interested in a career in video game scoring. And start by talking about the company makeup and the composers that you have on board.
Sure. So Somatone is unique in that we have this in-house music service.
Mhm.
I think most people know that in the video game industry, composers typically work independently.
Yeah.
So we're unique in having a music team. And we have 2 full-time staff composers and essentially 2 full-time independent contractors who work with us exclusively in games. So it's a team of 4 people. They're all off-site because we have completely run out of room here in Emeryville. And if I could have everybody under one roof, I certainly would. But currently we have John Hoagie in Pennsylvania. We have Alex Walker-Smith in Oregon. Then we have Vijay Baraput in Los Angeles, and Ilya, whose last name I can't pronounce, in Los Angeles as well. Yeah. So 4, that's really the core team.
Mm-hmm. And Richard Warp has recently joined you guys, correct?
Yeah, so Richard joined us as a producer. So Richard is kind of like an Ollie.
Okay.
They're very different people. They're both individuals, but they kind of do the same work, which is all of that complex wrangling, working directly with the clients to understand what the project is all about, and assigning the sound and music tasks to the team. And given that Somatone runs about 25 to 30 projects at once, typically,
wow.
I know it's a big job, and so Richard joined us a few weeks ago. Richard is also an accomplished sound designer and composer. So he got a little bit of a shock, just in terms of how things work here and the pace of things. But he's doing great, and we love working with Richard already.
Yeah, Richard's fantastic. Of course, he's on the Designing Music Now team and has many years of experience at Leapfrog. So he was working with one client, and now it must, having all of this to manage must be really a change of pace for him.
Yeah, I mean, Richard, Ollie, and I think I can speak for all of us and say we all had that experience of coming into Somatone and just being kind of amazed and having to sort of adjust to the pace and to the number of clients and the different kinds of projects. And there's definitely a ramp up time.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, Richard is in that period right now.
So besides your in-house, in a sense, or your full-time staff of composers, do you also work with, when the projects, when those 4 get overloaded or overwhelmed, do you also work with contract composers?
Sure. It's somewhat rare, but we do sometimes assign overflow work to contractors. When it gets over 30 projects at once. We start looking at overflow, and we have a close group of trusted people that we go to. And sometimes we have very specialized requests.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll get requests for styles, that are sort of outside of the norm. Sometimes we get requests for specific instrumentation, like a lot of electric guitar or mandolin or
violin,
cello.
Those kinds of things. Yeah.
So that's when we reach out and work with some trusted partners that work with us occasionally.
Yeah.
And for the music, do you find mostly you're using live instruments and recording in studios, or is it a lot of virtual and sort of all in the box digital production?
Primarily in the box, but again, we get special requests where they want a live touch, and so we can accommodate however they want.
That said, we did record a fully live orchestra for the upcoming Ratchet and Clank game.
Oh, cool.
We recorded all live, and we do record soloists and occasionally bring in, like, not that long ago, we brought in 2 violinists. So we sweeten occasionally.
Yeah.
Right.
But for the most part, we're recording really great sounding music that's produced in the box.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, the sample library is available today. Just, you're getting, for example, I just did a review on Orchestral Tools Metropolis Arc 1, and they are recording these incredible musicians in the best recording sound stage in Europe at Teldex, with the best microphones. These are $15,000-$20,000 microphones, each one of them, with the best engineers. And, if you were to try and reproduce that with your own, setup, that would just be, virtually impossible, I think. So being able to have access to these incredibly sampled libraries that are playable and easy to use, I think makes all the difference today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, one last point is when we bring on new composers, we do go through a phase where we need to acclimate them to our expectations in terms of sound quality.
Yep.
And a lot of that goes to the libraries that they're using, for example. Sometimes people fall in love with instrument libraries they just have a particular love for them, but maybe it actually doesn't sound that great.
Yeah,
so so we have to bring people on board and do a little bit of orientation in terms of what we're expecting for quality, which is, we do have a high standard.
Yeah, there's definitely a ramp up. For sure. Yeah.
So what are some of the libraries that you guys look for in your composers, or which ones do you prefer?
I mean, I think one of the standards is the East-West stuff that I think a lot of the composers are using. What's another one that seems to be quite popular?
Spitfire.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that Mike just sent over. There's a new string, sustained legato string library. I'm trying to remember the maker that came out recently. I'm drawing blanks.
Yeah, there's some great libraries from Sound Iron. A lot of good video game sounding libraries as well. Yeah, and Sonokinetic. Yeah, great. So back to my original question about advice for talented composers. What do you have like a 3-point based on, from your experience, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's out there listening to this podcast and really wants to make a living and help, essentially, it's not going to happen overnight necessarily, but what are things that they can do to help cultivate their career?
Okay, I would love to answer that. So I think this might be surprising. My first answer is you need to be prepared to be professional. Now, I know that sounds vague, so I'll clarify. There are a lot of incredibly talented people out there. There are brilliant composers out there, brilliant musicians. But the video game industry is an industry, and it requires a degree of professionalism. And what do I mean by that? I mean communication skills. I mean some people skills. Look, for composers, it can be challenging because we spend a lot of time as designers and composers alone in dark rooms with electronics. And it doesn't lend itself particularly well to growing your social skills.
Yeah.
So what we find sometimes is super talented people who have trouble with structure and communication, and it can totally kill your, you know, a potential opportunity that you may have in front of you because you don't have that together. So I would say that is number one.
Yeah.
It's a given that you've had the training, that you're talented, or you wouldn't be pursuing a gig as a composer. So let's now think about, how do I present myself?
Mm-hmm.
Keeping in mind that we spend a lot of time in dark rooms with flashing lights.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say next is the demo.
Mm-hmm.
So be prepared to present the best of the best that you've got. And people get very confused on this point. Some people feel that they must present themselves as the Swiss Army knife of composers. I can do anything. I can do big band. I can do, you know, what?
Whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
anything.
hybrid electronic, you know,
Yeah.
electronic plus orchestra.
Yeah.
I can do rock. I can do, you know, but that's not what we're really expecting. I mean, we want range.
I'm hoping.
We're hoping
for that action.
But actually,
The more the better.
for a demo reel,
Yeah.
we want to hear what you do best.
Absolutely.
And we want it to be, and this goes back to the professionalism point.
Yeah.
We need it to be presented in a way that is listener friendly. We recently received a demo from a person who will remain unnamed. One of the demo portions was like an hour long.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Wow.
and good for you, man. Like, that's awesome that you've done. But you know, we don't have time. And you know, be realistic about who your audience is. Present your reel with your audience in mind. Succinct, to the point. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you do. We want to hear the best of the best. And I know these things are super obvious, but when it's right in front of you and you got to get it to this potential job opportunity, you can kind of freak out and maybe do the wrong thing and send over that hour-long video capture that we're not going to watch.
Yeah, we're not gonna
Next thing is have your LinkedIn, have your IMDb, have, you know, all of that curriculum vitae stuff ready to rock, so that, because as soon as we get that phone call from you or we find out who you are, we're going to go to IMDb, we're going to go to LinkedIn, and if it looks weird, then we're going to not continue looking at you know, the potential of that person. Those are some ideas. What about you?
No, I'm in agreement. I think communication is key. I mean, absolutely. The working relationship's about, you know, trust and reliability. Because we move so quickly, we want to know that we have a pretty clear channel and quick channel between the designers and the composers. So that's real. I mean, obviously skill and abilities, and I agree, putting your best foot forward is really critical. But having being able to give us a clear picture of what you can do. First and foremost, communication as well. I fully agree.
One more thing. A lot of students find themselves thinking, you know, I need experience in order to get a real opportunity, but I need the opportunity, so how do I get the experience? And there's this cart before the horse thing that happens where they're like, I don't know what to do. So that is a great question. And in my opinion, you need to do anything that you can do. Student work.
Yep.
You know,
put music to any of your favorite movies,
yes.
Even if it's just a minute. That's awesome. We can get a lot out of hearing just a minute of your music for sure.
Offer your
unless it's droning music or
yeah. I mean, get together with the game community that's out there and figure out how you might be able to maybe, and I hate to say this, do some work for free, just to get some demo material so that you can present it to a company like Somatone or to an Activision or to a, you know, DNA or whoever it is. You need material to show, and that is often the sticking point. How do I get stuff I can show if I don't have an opportunity to work?
Yeah.
So you got to get ambitious, and you need to do a little bit of business development.
Yeah, last one I think I can think of is really, I mean, if I asked you, what's your favorite soundtrack? What's your favorite soundtrack to a game? You know, like, I want to hear where your ears are at. You know, that tells us a lot what you're queuing into, whether you're into more of the indie games or if you're into the big AAA stuff. But familiarizing yourself enough with what the trends are and really seeing your passion, like, what are you into? You know, helps us understand where we could put you.
Excellent point. sometimes we meet people, who are looking to get into games as a composer or sound designer, and then when we kind of ask the tough questions about, well, what's your favorite game that you've played recently, or what kind of games are you into, we get kind of a less than excellent answer. Do your homework. Like, if this is really what you want to do, dive in and make it your life.
Yep.
Like, devote yourself to knowing what's hot, what's cool, and what you enjoy as a player.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, passion.
Fantastic. Well, I've got a couple of follow-up questions, and the first one is, what's a good length for a demo for you? I mean, is it a minute and a half? Is it 5 minutes? Is it clearly not much longer than that? What would be what's something that you are willing to look in a new composer?
2 to 3 minutes. 3 minutes, let's just say 3 different cues. One's orchestral, one's a little bit more electronic in nature, maybe something in between or something other than that. But also moods, if there's more of like this dramatic, here's an action, and here's something a little bit more sweeping and ambient in nature. But breadth and diversity in the type of work. So yeah, 3 to 5 minutes I would think would be reasonable.
And composers should be prepared to offer a custom demo.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you get that opportunity, you're talking to someone who is in a hiring position, you may need to start getting creative and start offering things like, give me an opportunity to score, the trailer for your game, or a capture from the gameplay of your project. I want to show you what I can do.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're starting off, you need to get creative.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And so the next follow-up question to both of you is, what video game scores are you listening to, and which video games are you playing?
Well, we just got Battlefront in the office here, so I've fully delved into, scratching the surface on how intricate the design work and music has been put together for that. That's a personal favorite. What else are people playing in the office? There's a lot of the indie games.
What we're actually planning on doing is diving into Ori and the Blind Forest.
Right. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we could just find time.
Yeah.
But that is definitely the game that I am looking forward to playing. And what I've seen of it so far, it's art musically and on the sound design level, it just looks brilliant. Sounds brilliant.
Great choice. Now let's move on to Somatone's previous work, and maybe, if you can, talk about any of the current exciting projects that you're working on. So first of all, you guys do cover just about every genre: AAA, casino, mobile, VR, and other platforms too. Let's talk about some of the previous stuff. For me, one of my favorite games on your roster, of course, League of Legends, but is Lords of the Fallen. Yeah, so yeah, huge fan of Dark Souls, and so Lords of the Fallen obviously it came out right in between Dark Souls, the two big Dark Souls releases. So when I wanted to play another game like it, I found that, and I just ate it alive. It was a really brilliantly done from the music and sound design perspective. Can you talk about that game and your process on working in that?
I agree. The work was good in that project, and we have definitely used captures of that project to present our work in that genre to other people who are also creating sort of the dark, similar games. So I absolutely agree. That was some good sound design. The cinematics, especially, I thought were well sound designed.
Yeah.
Definitely a feather in the cap for Somatone.
Yeah.
Is there a game in particular that you'd like to talk about that you could go into some detail about?
This is part of why Somatone is unique. We have so many clients. They're all special in their different ways. And so we're very different from a studio that handles, maybe 2 or 3 projects. And maybe that's what you do for 6 months or 8 months or even a year. We have long-term relationships with many clients, and it's not just one game. It's the client.
Yeah.
So if you were to ask me, who are the special clients, that's kind of where I would go. The Super Evil Megacorps, certainly Riot. Who else comes to mind?
Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers. We're doing several projects with Warner Brothers right now.
SGN.
SGN.
On the casual side. Yep.
Yep. Storm 8 on the casual side. Who else?
Originator. I mean, as far as really deep voiceover and character development through these, little animations is really
certainly we have to mention Insomniac.
Yeah.
Who else?
I mean, just Frema. There's tons of people. Konami. We recently did a bunch of slot music for Konami for actual physical slot machine games.
My wife actually knows one of the Hiltons, and he was telling her that they put the slot machines right near the doors of the casinos because that draws people in. And there's a very addictive quality to the music that comes out of out of the slot machine music. And people have studied that, like Karen Collins actually has written a lot about the music of, how it affects the dopamine and the dopaminergic response in the brain. Did you guys think about any of that when you were composing music for slot machines?
Definitely. I mean, it's really about trying to work within a short amount of time to create something that is interesting but not annoying. And that's tough, something that pulls people in and they get into this kind of groove, but it doesn't get grating. And that's a lot of the type of music that we're trying to produce, is stuff that really sits nicely and is enjoyable, but you don't get too hit over the head by. So
there's one thing to add to that. In the casino world, I would say, hopefully you'll agree with me, is when it comes to that kind of dopamine producing effect, I think a lot of that comes from what we call stingers.
Absolutely.
So it's those payoff moments, the reward moments. Like, the really sophisticated companies that do slots, like Konami, they have that completely in mind, and it's our responsibility to create the audio equivalent of some of those animations that reward the player and make people feel really good and frankly totally addicted to playing the game. And there is this incredible response that people get when you combine sound with that visual reward. And if it doesn't have the sound, it doesn't do the trick. It doesn't give you that dopamine boost.
Yeah, it's like it's definitely audio magic. It's just creating this kind of candy effect where you hear something and you get acclimated to that reward system, and it keeps people playing. I mean, it's weird.
And I would say, that our experience in the casino games has definitely helped us to present those same kind of ideas to our clients working in other genres.
Absolutely.
So we've got all the experience making what we call stingers, and all of the variations and forms that can go into, and then being able to offer that same concept to people making games of all types. I think that's been something that we've learned from casino projects.
All the different genres and projects, they all they all complement each other, and that's the good of that for sure.
Well, let's talk about the stingers in this aspect of dopamine. What type of scales and chords do you use for that? Is there a sort of a formula where you stick mostly to major keys and triads, or do you, can you do minor keys give you just the same? Does it have to do with the speed, the repetition? Is it the fanfare? Is it the instrumentation? I'm sure it's all of that, but what are the key elements of a good fanfare or a good stinger?
That's good. That's a really great question. I definitely say a major key. We'll talk fanfares that are celebratory. Major key, it's something between 2 to 3 seconds. More often than not, orchestral in nature, possibly emphasizing brass, and higher region of strings, perhaps. But it's really, simple, choral structure, 1/5, 1/5/7, something like that. But it's really open-ended, man. And there are a lot of occasions for stings. Some are, they're neutral in nature. Some of them are really, really exciting. Some of them are negative. You failed. You didn't pass whatever goal you were trying to. So there's no formula, so to speak, but major is definitely a starting point for positive experiences. For sure.
And that goes to the idea of tuning sounds with
Yeah,
music that
absolutely.
so when we do a game like these, like a slots project, for example, we're tuning
Yeah.
everything so that it fits together.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds super obvious, but it's not always done.
No.
But you know, some of our sound designers have a musical background and are very adept at creating that tuning between the sounds and the music, and certainly the stingers are a major sort of expression of that tuned experience.
Yeah, yeah. Music usually comes first. If we kick off a project, we start with music, and we build from there. And we start with one theme and start from there, and that helps us tune the sound effects even to the instruments that are used.
Very cool. And for the negative stingers or the depressing ones, you clearly don't want the person to walk away from the slot machine. So are they shorter and are they minor rather than, let's say, a diminished? What's the design goal there?
Yeah, I mean, minor is a definitely good place to start. Diminished for things and titles that might require more of like that, I guess, fantasy or sort of spooky elements. But definitely nothing like super dissonant or really harsh, you know. Although, I mean, we do have projects that are a little bit more outside of the box, and some of that stuff does show up, you know. But generally, for slots games, for example, we're fitting in that sort of bracket.
Fantastic. So speaking of dissonant, do you have any projects that you've had the opportunity to work in aleatoric music with some really interesting recordings of orchestras doing crazy things?
Wow, that's a really interesting question.
That kind of musical adventurism is rare.
Yeah.
We would love to have opportunities like that.
Yeah.
And I must say that most of our clients are musically surprisingly sophisticated. Like, we're always taken aback and pleasantly surprised by the sophistication.
Yeah.
But it doesn't typically include getting adventurous on that level. Would you agree?
I would. I mean, I'd personally love to see us move into some of those interesting realms, but generally, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that we've done that would really line up with that. It'd be cool though.
I'm sure it'll come one day soon.
Yeah.
I think actually it is. I mean, we see it with, of course, the BioShock series and Gary Scheinman's work, with Jason Graves' work in Dead Space. And I think, you know, you begin to see more and more of it creeping in. So I was just curious if you guys have had any opportunity to do that. Regarding the different genres that you're working in, AAA, casino, mobile, VR, what's the balance at Somatone? What do you find the most work coming to you in these days? And let me add another category there of indie. Do you get a lot of approaches from indie developers?
Sure, those are great questions. So I actually have like a very specific breakdown of all of this, and I won't get into that kind of detail, but on a very sort of high level, a little over half of our work is in the mobile space. So let's just talk about that for a second. As little as a year and a half ago, that was largely comprised of what I would call casual games. In the past year and a half, that 50% plus of our business has morphed into what we call sort of mid-core games. These are clients who are ambitious about what they're doing, are looking to push the envelope on what's possible in mobile, and are very specific about what they're looking for musically and in sound. And that is a creature that was kind of non-existent before, and which has become pretty much the bulk of that plus 50% of our business. So that's been a very cool thing to see. The other 40% of the business is made up, like we said, about maybe 15% of AAA work. There's some VR in there, and there's definitely indie games in there. Our main indie client, who we are very proud to have, is Super Evil Megacorp. But we recently did work with Nimbly, for example. Who else comes to mind? There's this gigantic list. I guess Subatomic is an indie.
I think Valhalla Games.
Yeah, I mean, so in short, there's a good percentage of indie there. There's a good percentage of Steam PC games. So it's quite varied.
Okay, so off of mobile, what is the next biggest platform that you're working on?
Sure. So are you talking in terms of like what's next?
PC, well, no, in terms of your current
Oh,
workload, is it PC, Xbox platform, or VR? What other besides mobile? How does that break down?
you can look at it many different ways in terms of, time and resources. Like the AAA projects they're big,
Mm,
and it requires a lot of attention and resources. So in that sense, AAA is probably next in line.
yeah.
Yeah, even though it might be three projects over several months, they're resource hungry, and so I would have to say that it is a major part of the business.
Cool. So, how much of your music, of the business is music? How much is sound design? How much is voiceover? And I want to talk quite a bit next about implementation, FMOD wise, and that portion as well. So, how much time do you spend in those different categories?
Again, we could get like extremely specific because we have all that data, but just sort of anecdotally and off the top of my head, about a year ago, I would have said music is like our gateway drug. That's what most people. That's what
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
back then it seemed like a lot of people were coming to us with that primarily in mind, and then again, one of the unique things about Somatone is that we bundle our services. We are able to offer clients all four of those things that you just mentioned, and very frequently that is what we're doing. We're doing everything, but music tended to be like what people came in the door for, the gateway drug. And sound design right behind that. What has shifted again in the past 12 months, probably less, probably 8 months, is that implementation is becoming more and more critical, and it's related to what I said before about the emergence, the evolution of the mid-core mobile project, is that people are more and more interested in the end product sounding awesome. And we love that. And so in order for that to happen, we need to be involved in placing the sounds in the game and mixing the sounds. And so that has been a growing part of the business over the past year.
Isn't FMOD and WISE just a huge benefit to have in this world now?
Yes, Wise we don't see that much. Probably counterintuitive. We see some FMOD, we see Unreal, we see a lot of Unity plugins. We see proprietary solutions. So it's a real mix.
Interesting. And do you find yourself, besides implementing the sound effects in middleware, do you also implement music in terms of adaptive music in the middleware as well?
Sure. And I would add, in September, we did ending in September, we did a 3-month project for 2K on XCOM 2. All that was dialogue implementation. So
Wow.
hundreds of thousands of dialogue lines. So we helped to set up their whole WISE pipeline for dialogue. So it isn't just sound effects. It's music, it's dialogue, it's any audio asset. We get involved in implementation.
Yep.
And has that been on the rise? Have clients become wise to the importance of middleware and adaptive music in games instead of just playing loops?
Well, more and more, yeah.
I think the adaptive music thing, for whatever reason, is slow in acceptance. And I don't know why that is. I would have predicted it would have been mainstream a long time ago. So I think that the clients in general are definitely more aware and understand the value of implementation. But we have that conversation all the time, where it's we have to say, and can we have the opportunity to work with you on implementation?
Yeah.
And then the client says, whoa, that's a great idea. But it does have to be said. It isn't something that pops into the mind of every client.
And do you, in mobile in particular, do you find there are any barriers to entry as far as them wanting to use middleware, FMOD wise? Do they feel like that's either overkill or something they just don't understand?
Well, we love our friends and colleagues at Audio Kinetic, but the fact is if there's a direct answer to your question, And an example to answer your question, it would be that people see Wise as being overkill. It's huge, and for a lot of mobile developers, it's a difficult integration process.
Mm-hmm.
So when they see Fmod and when they look at Master Audio or Fabric as Unity plugins, they're like, this is so easy. I can just plug this in. And frankly, you know, you're talking about turnaround times that are faster and faster. There's a lot of pressure on these developers, and plugging in Wise can, I mean, amazingly, it's still not, for some developers, it's not that simple.
Right. No, it's been my experience as well. Fmod certainly is fairly easy. Another one that I've been using a lot is Elias for music and for adaptive music. It is a breeze in comparison. I had done some adaptive music comparisons where, and to set up something in Elias took about an hour, whereas to do the same thing in Wise were 3 days. So,
Wow.
yeah, so Elias is really great, and it's specifically music, and it's got a really simple interface. So I found that to be really helpful. And that, you know, when you're obviously charging by the hour for your work, it can be an easier sell, I would think, too. Okay, so thank you so much for your time today. The final questions that I have for you are about how do you see the future of game audio? Do we see, you know, continued growth in mobile VR? You know, are indie developers continuing to grow and take over? Look into your crystal ball. Tell me what you see.
That's a super broad, excellent question. Thank you. So, you know, I think there's a lot of energy behind VR right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of enthusiasm, and people are very excited, and there's certainly a lot of money. So one could say that looks very promising in terms of what's next, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I definitely think that we're going to see some new, amazing, interesting opportunities and possibilities in that world.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't think it's going to ramp up quite as fast as some people think.
Yeah.
But we're really looking forward to diving in, and especially because I believe we're going to have the opportunity to do a lot of realism work, because, you know, building worlds in VR, and I think that's going to be a really interesting new aspect to what we do.
Absolutely.
We would love to get more involved in indie. I see the indie space becoming more and more energized. I was just at Indiecade a couple of months ago and was just amazed by how many people were there, how energized it was, and really just satisfying to see all this cool, frankly, art being created in the interactive world. And so I hope to see more and more of that, and we would love to do more of that work.
Definitely.
You know, my background is mostly in AAA, and so of course it's dear to my heart, but I actually think we'll probably see a continuing contraction on that side. There will always be the huge, wonderful games, the Tomb Raiders, the Call of Duties, the Battlefields, etc. But I think the appeal of the mobile device, the appeal of the VR headset, provided it becomes less clunky, etc. I think that's going to drive consumers, you know, more and more to potentially leaving their consoles behind. So that's what I see. As far as game audio is concerned, in my opinion, there is no question that we're headed into the future of more procedural sound, music, and voice. Highly adaptive, procedural, on-the-fly, real-time systems. The age of the fixed sound, the fixed piece of music that plays back the same way every time, I can't wait until that becomes a dinosaur and that we're doing stuff that is procedural and happening during gameplay. And I think when that happens, you know, I think we're going to open up a whole new world of entertainment possibilities and really making an impact on the listener, viewer, player.
Great. And Ollie, where do you see it going? What's your crystal ball show you?
No, I mean, Adam he said a lot of I mean, I share, I'm in agreement. I'd like to see music continue to evolve. I think that there's a lot more open-mindedness to what constitutes a score, and that sort of blurring between sound design and music, how both of those things start working together. And you're seeing that a lot in the indie market, I think. And that's really, people are seeing the power of that. They're seeing the power of, like, wow, I'm enjoying this experience. I don't know if it's quite music. I don't know what it is, but I think that in a more of a mass level, that is happening, and I think it's going to continue. And I think that sound design is going to continue to become more sophisticated in its musical quality, and scores are going to become more sophisticated in their sound design qualities. And I love that. That to me is where it's at. So that's at least the creative direction I see things going. Yeah, absolutely.
And fantastic, guys. What an interview. I really, really appreciate all of your honesty and your candor and just brilliant insights. Really, really appreciate you. Appreciate Somatone. You guys are awesome, and I wish you the best of luck. And just keep making this great sound and great music.
Thank you, Dale. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Designing Music Now podcast, a podcast dedicated to the craft of creating music for video games and interactive media. Please visit us at designingmusicnow.com for more info, news, and reviews on this subject. We would love to hear from you.